Welcome to Content with Character, the weekly podcast that'll give you the momentum you need to create content with more ease, clarity, and laughter. I'm your host, content copywriter Emily Aborn, and I'm all about unconventional marketing approaches. I believe in your big ideas, and I'm excited to help you share them in a way that's distinctly you. It's about time we talk about time. This isn't going to be like your average time management kind of thing. I'm talking about a recent time experiment that I conducted, and then we're going to talk about time boundaries. What are they? How to determine time boundaries that work for you, no matter what you are looking to accomplish and enjoy in your life. Time. Is it your friend or your foe? Something to tame or a conceptless entity? Since, I don't know, maybe the dawn of time, I don't really know when it all started, but people have been making themselves very busy tracking time, attempting to tame time, and inventing things that then occupy their time. It's been said that time is our most valuable resource, and I believe a lot like money, we often try to give it a job, aka schedule it or prioritize it. We run the risk of being short on it, right? We have like time scarcity or and being late or regretting that we didn't make time for something that we wish we had. Too much time, not enough time. Either way can leave you feeling really, really trapped. I remember on the topic of too much time, I remember when I was a kid and I just had too much time on my hands. Far, far too much. I would spend hours of the day gazing out the window of my bedroom like Ariel in The Little Mermaid. Like, I want to just be where the people are. I was homeschooled and I just really wanted to grow up already so that I could start using my time by going after my dreams and doing all the things in the world that I felt that I had the potential to do. So as an adult, though, I am easily overwhelmed with not having enough time. I don't have enough time to sit out and stare out the window, which I think is equally as problematic. So as old William Penn said, time is what we want most, but what we use the worst. And I do kind of agree with him in some ways. In this episode, I think it's about time that we talk about time. And it's not going to be like time management or productivity tips. I'm simply going to share a recent time tracking experiment that I did, and I want to talk about what came out of that as far as like creating time boundaries around your time, and how to like decide what those time boundaries are going to be for you, depending on what you really want to enjoy in your life and what you really feel that you're here to accomplish and achieve. So there's a balance, and I think that you can have both. Before we get into the episode, I just want to introduce myself super duper fast, and I also want to welcome our new listeners. Specifically, I know that Lisa, Crystal, and Kathy are all recently new listeners. So I want to say hello to you folks and thank you for being here. And if you're a loyal listener, I'm so delighted that you're back. Thank you for being here too. Thanks for cheering me on, tuning in, and helping me to spread the word about the Content with Character podcast. So I'm based out of New England, for those of you who don't know, New Hampshire specifically. And as I was recently looking into the stats of the show, I am delighted to announce two things. Number one, we are globally listened to. Hooray, us. And number two, in the U.S. alone, we have so many states represented here. I'm not going to be able to even name them all, but like some that jumped out at me that I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. Arizona, Georgia, Texas, North Carolina, Florida, Maine, California, Utah, Massachusetts, Colorado. The list goes on, but it was a very exciting list. Very exciting. So in case we haven't met, I'm Emily Aborn. I'm the host of this show, obviously. I'm a content copywriter, and I love writing content and copy. I write website copy, blogs, and other marketing materials, as well as brand messaging guides for small businesses and entrepreneurs. I do have a little niche carved out for myself in the world of home trades, but I love working with coaches and consultants and entrepreneurs who really have a big vision for how they can impact the lives of others. So if you ever want to learn more about me or you're interested in what I offer, you can visit my website at EmilyAborn.com. All the links are always in the show notes. That's pretty much one thing you can guarantee for me is that I put pretty much everything I refer to, including quotes, sometimes built out episode show notes. I put them all in the show notes. And the other thing about the show notes, which has recently become super fun, is that there's also 2 new buttons or 2 new links right at the top. One where you can call and leave a voice message, which is super fun. And then the other one where you can actually text message the podcast. So that's also super fun. That's a new feature from Buzzsprout. So if you want to text the show or leave me a voicemail, there's a good chance that that's going to make an appearance in a future episode. So give it a try. Okay. Time to talk time. Let's roll up our sleeves. It's hard to talk about time because it really is. It is a construct. It is a little bit elusive. There's not really any such thing as time. We just, as human beings, made it an official thing. Kind of, again, like money. Like it sort of gives us a currency with which to all be on the same page and all to exchange things with one another. It's actually really interesting. I will be comparing money and time just a little bit in this episode, but I didn't know what the actual definition of time was. So I thought it would be fun to start there. What is time actually? What is it? It doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't make any sense how sometimes it moves so fast and sometimes it trickles by, right? It's so weird, even though you may be dealing with the same unit of time. So here's the definition by the dictionary of time. Time is the indefinite, there you go, the indefinite continued progress of existence and events in the past, present, and future regarded as a whole. I think even that definition, that very universally accepted definition, even the very definition makes it sound like a mythical unicorn. So my question, I guess, to begin this episode was why are we so obsessed with defining time and being rigid with time as a society? And I think that some of the answer is in that, our days are numbered. Time does run out eventually to do everything that we want to do, to experience everything that we want to do, and to be everything that we hope to be. And our individual days, even in themselves, they are not infinite unless somehow you figured out not to sleep ever. But I so far have not mastered that. So what we do as a society is we mark time by sun up, sundown, right? Bedtime, my favorite time of the day most days. God, I love my bed. Okay, I need to stop thinking about it because I might just go crawl into it instead of recording this episode. I'm going to share a few quotes throughout the episode, and here's one I think expresses why we maybe put so much weight on time. This is by Jonathan Estrin. The way we spend our time defines who we are. That's his quote. Because we use time to create and generate what we feel is definitive or a marker or the meaning of our existence. Okay, we'll dance out of the ethereal a little bit and I'll move this into a real story and some practical. Okay, so back in May, I turned 38 and I wanted some ideas on counting down, aka marking time, before I turned 40. So I started a little experiment. In fact, it's a number of experiments. So my plan is to conduct 104 experiments and with my life and report back on them. And I'm kind of making that window be from May 13th, 2024 to May 13th, 2026. So 2 full years of experimentation, basically one a week with various things. And this is going to include everything from health stuff to creative stuff to work to play. There are no rules. The only rules are that there are no rules because it's all an experiment. So in considering how I wanted to kind of like structure my experiments, start my experiments, where I wanted to document them, I randomly one Sunday afternoon got myself involved in Substack, which let me just tell you, oh my God, it is an amazing place for a person who loves to write. It reminds me of when I used to write my own little WordPress blogs, or I was like one of the first persons on MySpace or Blogger or Blogspot who just like was very, very prolific with the blogs. So I kind of love Substack because it reminds me of that time. There are not words for how rewarding Substack has been for me already. So of course, I'm going to include the link to my Substack if you're at all interested in subscribing to these little experiments and following along the way. Maybe you'll want to try some of your own. But basically, the goal for me was just to have like a personal writing project. Like I'm doing this for myself, not for other people, but I do hope that, of course, other people will find it interesting. I didn't want to make this live on my business blog because it's not related to content writing and marketing and visibility and copywriting. It's just literally a personal project. It's just kind of for me. So at the same time that I was embarking on this, I started to feel a lot of pressure in life. Now, I've had a lot of stress and then unraveling of the stress. I've had a lot of overcommitment and a lot of overwhelm, and then realizing what I need to do to not be overcommitted and overwhelmed. And recently, it's been starting to creep back in and feel like old times. This was like old time revisiting stress where I constantly felt like I was on this merry-go-round of overcommitment and overwhelm, and I couldn't handle everything on my plate that was happening on a regular basis on the day-to-day. Now, looking back, or taking a step out, that wasn't really true. But I wasn't prioritizing things properly. So I wasn't actually really prioritizing much besides work. And as a result, I was just kind of like accommodating a lot of things. I was squeezing things in here, there, and everywhere. And I was just trying to do it all. And I also wanted, of course, like that personal part of my life. And so everything was just kind of overlapping. Like what was happening was that my work days became this unmanageable mishmash, like a blending of so many things, and never really quite feeling like I did what I actually set out to do in a day. So I was feeling very unproductive in using my time to reach the goals and reach the things that really mattered, if that makes sense. So I knew, based on that feeling I was having, that one of my experiments, and I actually ended up making it my first experiment, was I needed to focus on time. And for me, that looked like tapping the brakes on being so busy, quote unquote, living, that I never stopped to ask myself, well, what am I really living for? Like, how am I being intentional towards what I really want my life to look like? So I needed to figure out how much time revenue have I got here? How much time am I actually realistically working with? And then I need to look at where the costs are, where the time expenses are coming from. And then, and only then, I'll sort of know what my net was or net is, and then I'll be able to kind of move forward and implement time boundaries and restructure accordingly. So I imagine that I'm not alone in feeling this way. A lot of us struggle with time management, time issues, not having enough time, having too much time, knowing what to do with all that extra time. So there's a lot of things that can pop up for you in this. But I think some questions to ask yourself to help you get started. And this is an example of something I would include in the show notes so that you can, reflect back on them. But some of the questions I would ask you to ask yourself: how do you want to spend your time? Now, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you have to work like I do, and knowing that many of you, like me, are actually the boss of our own ships, what does that sweet spot look like for us? Like, how do I want to be spending my time? That answer alone will give you a lot of information. We often play the game in our house of like, if you won the lottery, what would you do with your time? And honestly, I can't say I wouldn't work because I really enjoy working, but I also enjoy other pieces of my life, and that are connecting with family, connecting with my friends, spending time with my dog, engaging in creative things, right? So that's my first question for you. How do you want to spend your time? What do you want time for? Creative projects, family, your business, fixing up your home, leisure, travel, hobbies, interests, friends, health and wellness. What does that look like for you? And then I would say to get real with yourself and ask how much time you need for the things that matter most to you in life. So is your family just time on the weekends? Is your fixing up your home just time in the evenings, right? Do you travel for weeks at a time? How much time do you need to focus on the things that matter to you in life? What do those kind of commitments look like? And some of what can help you with this, oops, we're losing a headphone here. There you go. You got some fun behind the scenes. Some of what can help you with this is like starting this experiment by listing out all of your commitments and like whether or not it's on a weekly basis, monthly basis, daily basis, that kind of thing. I didn't do that for the purpose of this experiment because I've done it before, but it is really, really, really helpful to see what you're actually like committed to in life. So then my last question for you is just how much time do you spend working on your business versus in your business? Now, what's the difference on that? On my business is things like this podcast, right? Posting this podcast, creating like maybe an SEO optimized blog, working on my social media or engaging on LinkedIn or networking with people or things like that. Tracking my mileage, doing my books, that's time spent on my business. Versus in my business is just like me meeting with clients, serving clients, all of the pieces therein. I was recently at an event where we went around the table and we were sharing our wins at where we were at in our businesses and also sharing our challenges and frustrations. One woman shared, and it was a beautiful sharing, that she struggles with distractions all day long. Now, on the surface, I don't think distractions during your workday are a bad thing. We see them weaponized a lot, but they're probably just an indication of what maybe you're curious about, what interests you, and also things that need to be done. In fact, while I was working on this episode, while I was writing these ideas down, I distracted myself and I called my vet to schedule an appointment for my dog, Clyde. Yes, that was a distraction, but it also needed to get done. And you know what? It wasn't on my list, so I just took care of it in that moment. So distractions sometimes are also a place where the magic can happen. Like when you're in the middle of your workday and your toddler comes in to interrupt you to ask if they can have a snack, and it ends up being this beautiful, amazing connected moment. Or you're mid-cleaning your house and your spouse asks you a super simple question, and next thing you know, you're having like this really, really beautiful conversation. So obviously, good things happen with distractions, and too many distractions, you can be up craps creek, right? And not get done the things that matter to you. So not all distractions are created equal. I'll say that. In response to this women's distraction frustration, people offered some really good ideas. Some were old ideas, some were new ideas. One was sort of to like structure her days so that she had focus days, and then days that were more like, it's okay if I'm distracted days. I find that really, really helps me. So Wednesdays are typically my it's okay if I'm distracted days, because I put all of my calls, all of my connections on Wednesdays, or at least that's the goal. We're getting back to that. But the other thing that I find helpful to manage distractions is to, and other people shared this as well, is to not try to like sit down and time block out your whole entire week at the beginning of the week, because things Well, am I right? They always pop up unexpectedly. But try time blocking at the beginning of the day. Or if you're finding things going like wildly off kilter and it's like 10:30 and you're like, oh my God, none of my time blocks are working. Sit down and redo it. Like, I'm going to re-time block out with the time that I have left. So you can always I think we think time blocking is so rigid when really it should be like malleable. It should be livable, movable alongside us. And that's where looking at just one day at a time, I find can be super, super helpful to overcome those distractions. And actually, case in point, going back to the example of calling my vet to schedule that appointment for my dog, they actually ended up scheduling it for this Thursday. And I already had a block of time for Thursday planned to do things. So that might have frustrated me, but now I know, okay, that's going to be a little glitch in that day and I'm going to rearrange those time blocks on Thursday. No big deal. So there were all sorts of ideas that people offered, but the key is that it's something a lot of us struggle with, and that's distractions, staying on track with our time, managing our time, using our time wisely, that kind of thing. Now, over the course of the past 2 years specifically, I want to be candid with you and share my time boundaries have really slipped. I used to consider myself a good time manager. I was a distraction-proof pro, and I really, really adhered to a lot of good time boundaries. But then after building them all up, and that took quite a bit of time in and of itself to learn what they were, where the limits were. So after building them all up and being ooh, I feel so good about this. Well, then I started to let things slide. And it was all in a matter of one family event, one happening in my life. From there, it was just kind of a write-off, an implosion of time boundaries. Well, I can't have anything structured because nothing can be planned for, so why plan for anything? Now, that doesn't really work for my specific personality. I am a person who thrives with structure. I really, really love structure, and I really love creating a plan for myself. It helps me to take those daily action steps, create those daily habits that feed into my bigger picture, okay? I think that some of this is, and I've shared this a little bit, I didn't have a lot of structure growing up. I was homeschooled and I stayed home a lot and had just ample free time with no real structure to fill it. And so academia really, really was helpful for a person like me. I did really well in that department. Even as an adult, I find myself going to a lot of those tried and true homework and study techniques and project techniques that I had learned in high school and college. And I rely a lot on systems I learned way back then in how it feels really good for me. I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm not suggesting everybody do this, but that's how it feels really good for me to manage my time a little bit. And that's how I can really see that, it's in the daily sort of commitments with my time that I'm working towards that big picture, those big picture goals, those big picture projects, right? So for a while, I had a pretty good thing going. My time was enjoyable. It was manageable. It felt good. It felt like I could do everything that I needed to do and also everything that I wanted to do. But then with, like I said, one kind of family thing, cue the downward spiral. And I don't know what happened, but it just all hit me. I let go of all time boundaries and everything was just up to anyone that needed it. And so quickly, I guess over the past 2 years really, but quickly it evolved into me being overwhelmed, frustrated, not really fulfilled, and trying to always make time for everything and everyone. So I'm going to share what I did, and I'll give you the quick takeaways of the experiment I did. And my goal really in doing this was to reestablish boundaries around my time. And I want to help you do that as well. Let's talk about how to reestablish the boundaries around our time, what that can actually look like if you want to do it, and how it can be really okay, I'm actually making friends with my time rather than trying to control it or to try to manage it, because time really can be our friend. It does not need to be our foe. There's this account on Instagram I follow right now, and I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes, but it's called Be More with Less. And I love something they just shared the other day. And I really, this rings so true. Juggling everything makes it impossible to enjoy anything. And I think that is just the perfect description of what happens when we don't have time boundaries in place, whether our personal lives or our professional lives. Okay, so here was the experiment and like how I kind of laid it out. I tracked my time like to the minute for an entire week and weekend. Now, I noticed as I was tracking my time, I thought it was just going to be kind of super easy. Like, all right, 15 minutes, it took me to do this. 20 minutes, it took me to do this. But it wasn't as simple as X took X amount of time, because you have to factor in those distractions, which is like, oh, I got distracted and I scrolled on Reddit, or I answered emails for 1 hour. Like, what? That took an hour somehow to answer all those emails? That's where it starts to get interesting. And that's why I think this experiment is so helpful, because you're watching, okay, this is my time revenue. This is how much time I have. And then you watch it kind of decrease as time quite literally slips through the cracks. And you're able to see what those things are. And are they things I really want to be filling my time with? Some of them are things that you have to be filling your time with, obviously. Some of them may be things that you think you want to fill your time with, but when you look at it, you're like, ooh, actually, that's not as important to me as I thought it was. So, and then you can take action from there, obviously. So at the end of that week, I realized a few places I was able to lessen the time I was spending on things. So like with email, that's a great example. There were still a lot of email accounts that I could just unsubscribe to, and I hadn't yet. And I was like, well, I'll just keep reading it. But they were taking up a lot more of my time. If I'm getting an email, if I'm subscribed to somebody's email, I genuinely read it and I genuinely spend time. And sometimes I'll even take time to write them a reply, right? So those were some places I could easily see, all right, I can less up on the time I'm spending in my inbox by unsubscribing. Then there were other things that I could rearrange to, I don't like the word optimize, but I guess stack. Okay, stack. So there were things I could rearrange to stack and do a couple of things in one. For example, am I mixing days where I'm running out and about, and I'll get to that in a minute, but days when I'm running out and about and also trying to mix calls, and then another day when I'm doing my grocery shopping. Like, it's like, you know what? It's like taking all right-hand turns instead of an entire errand running spree of left-hand turns. It's so much easier if you can somehow map out all your errands to be all right-hand turns, right? You're like, whoop, big circle. And it's just a lot easier to turn right than it is left. So there were a lot of things I could rearrange to kind of optimize or stack. And then the other thing I saw clearly was things that I needed to let go of entirely. Like, bye-bye, I don't have time for that anymore. And that's when I realized at the end of this experiment, I said, okay, I need to reestablish my time boundaries. And this is for you to kind of play around with and look at. And I do think that the time tracking for a week is kind of an important part because it gives you a really, really accurate picture. But when you decide on your time boundaries, it's something only you can choose. This is where you decide whether or not back-to-back Zoom meetings for 12 hours is the life you can do and also that you want. Some people like that. Some people don't. You can also put in places where you're going to choose to work out and choose to rest and drink water and spend time with your family and friends. It's basically making active, conscious, intentional decisions around your time. And realizing also that your time and how you choose to spend it impacts you and also others. It also impacts how you show up for others, how present you are, right? If you're always rushing around, it's harder to be present. It just is. And I think that creating those time boundaries often involves saying the difficult thing up front rather than letting it get out of control, which is 100% completely what I was guilty of, instead of just stating what I need right off the bat. For example, oh, I have a yoga class that day and I can't make that time work, rather than saying, you know what, I'm just going to put my self-care aside for this client, or make an exception for this meeting. Or another example is like when somebody comes to visit you, you could start out with saying, hey, so-and-so, I'm so happy you're here. I have until X time to visit, because then I've dedicated time to my kiddos. And when you say it up front like that, like it might feel like, ooh, uncomfortable, difficult, honest. But when you say it up front like that, there's just no resentment on the other side, and there's less misunderstanding down the road. So the list goes on of like different ways to do that in different scenarios, but it really comes down to like spelling it out for people, communicating it clearly, and being upfront to prevent those misunderstandings and those future resentments, establishing the boundary. Now, around your business, it might look like specifically creating business hours that people can call you and text you and email you, or business hours that you'll respond to those things, right? And then sticking to it. It might look like you committing to yourself, I'm only going to check emails 3 times a day at this hour, and this hour. It may be saying no to projects that you can't take on right now when you already have a full workload, or pushing projects just a little bit further down the road. I work with a wonderful collaborator, Jenny Belanger, and recently she had asked me about a client project and a proposed timeline. And I said, I just had to be real and honest and upfront with her and said, I actually won't be able to do that until, I won't be able to have that completed until probably the week after that. So we just reestablished a really realistic guideline. And that's another one, is being clear about time frames and expectations from clients and also the subcontractors you're working with. And then lastly, in your business, I think it's really important to set aside specific time, not just hoping that it's going to happen or that you'll find the time. You actually have to set aside specific time for things that matter to you in life outside of your business, like your family, like your friends, like your hobbies and your interests and your creative projects, for you, your self-care, to go for a walk, right? Like you actually have to consciously put that time aside and not just hope that you're going to have time for it. And some of that comes down to checking those commitments and saying, you know what? I am going to need to let something go so that I have more time to be able to spend with my family and my friends. The list goes on, but I think that in order to get honest with yourself around your time, you're going to want a couple of things. You're going to want a couple tools. First of all, you're going to want to know how you want to spend your time and why. Going back to that beginning question I asked you. What are you really working towards? What do you want to be known for in this lifetime? What do you want to do in this lifetime? And I know you're like, Emily, these are ridiculously large questions. I just want to know how to manage my Wednesday. But these are important questions to answer for yourself, because it's the days, it's the hours, it's the minutes, it's the seconds. These are the puzzle pieces in this big, big picture that we're putting together. So I want to ask you what you want that big picture to look like. What do you most want to create in this lifetime? And as Mary Oliver says, it's your one wild, precious life. What are you going to do with it? That's a paraphrase, by the way. The second thing you need to do is be upfront with yourself, be honest with yourself about how you're spending your time. And some of this, I do think that it can help you have that data by time tracking, just like a week. You don't have to go crazy with it, but you'll be able to see clearly, well, what am I giving my time away to freely? Like, here's a great question for you. How much of your time do you feel is reciprocal? In some situations, are there situations where you're not being compensated for your time and you're just giving it away left and right, but you're not getting any payment for it? So okay, so just like money, time can be an investment, right? Sometimes we do give time and there will be a receiving down the road. It does not always need to be immediate. It does not always need to be an exact balance. It's not like money in that way, but there are also cases where we are giving and giving and giving our time. It's cutting into that time expense, and our revenue that we started with is really, really coming out a little short in the net, and how fulfilled we feel. And then my question in there with you is like, well, am I spending time on things that really matter to me? Are you spending it on things that really matter to you personally, but also in growing your business? Like, let's just be really, really honest with ourselves. What can you there will be other places, maybe you're like, oh my God, this is making me think I just really need to delegate this thing. I need to just give this to somebody else to do. It's not a waste of time. It's a waste of me spending my time on this, and my time could be used for something else. That's kind of what people do with me as their copywriter, right? They're like, okay, I could sit here for 20 hours and spin my wheels over what to say on my website or in my blog, or in my marketing materials, but that's not the highest and best use of my time. So I'm going to delegate it to Emily, who's going to probably do it a lot faster than that, but B, knows what she's doing, right? So, and I know it's going to be right the first time. I'm not going to have to spend a bunch of time on the back end cleaning it all up. The other place you might see, and I think there's like D's around time, like delegate, do, delete, but delete is another one. What can you literally just be like, okay, that can get off of my calendar for good. I've left with consideration and thought, I've left a lot of things behind that I'm just like, you know what? That isn't something I really want to be giving my time to right now. And then like in my vet example, there are other things that probably you're putting off and they would take 5 minutes, literally just 5 minutes, and you could just do them. So I don't love the phone. And I feel like I have to caveat that by being like, I'm not a typical millennial in not loving the phone. I talked on the phone way too much as a kid and I never liked it. Okay. I did sit there and talk on the phone for a really, really long time, but I always did not enjoy myself. So it's not that I don't know how to use the phone. It's not that I've only ever used my phone for texting. I just don't like the phone. It makes me uncomfortable. So for me, making phone calls or having phone calls is something I'm going to move way down on my list. And in most cases, those phone calls take 5 minutes, right? Like calling the vet to schedule my dog for an appointment, or paying some bill, or, calling the dentist to move something. So in most cases, those things take 5 minutes. So I will sometimes sit down and make that whole list of all the do's that are going to be 5 minutes. And I'm like, I'm going to do all of these in 1 hour. And the chutzpah I need to do them, it kind of is it just keeps building on itself. So then when I'm done, the motivation is there to do bigger things with my time, right? So delegate, delete, do. I think there's another one. You know what? I paused that and just went and looked it up, and it is actually defer. So there you go. Delegate, delete, do, defer, meaning delay it. Okay, I will actually do that later. So those are the 4 D's of time management or productivity. So those are the other questions you can ask yourself. And then where do you need to, when you're setting boundaries, it's like a reset button. For me, it's a reset button. So then I get to say, okay, moving forward, where do I need to be more careful with my yeses? This is a big one for me. I was reminded recently, I do not need to say yes instantly. I don't need to say yes without taking time to consider it. We all get the invitation to say, I will circle back with you on that, or let me check my calendar for that week, or let me see if I can make that happen. Any number of sentences that don't have you committing to something on the spot is totally A-okay and your prerogative. And it also helps those who maybe are people pleasers, which we're going to get into next week. Oh my God. But yeah, it also helps those who might be more inclined to the people pleasing to not say yes instantly. Okay, wrapping up, there's no right or wrong way to use or manage your time. And I think that's another really important thing I just want to highlight, because we see all kinds of people's frameworks and time management techniques and tactics and tips and hacks and all that stuff. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's all individual to you. And it's also very subjective. So like for what feels good to one person might not feel good to another. So I don't care if you work nights or weekends. I don't care if you only work one day a week or all day long every day. The key is that you feel good about the way that you're using your time, and that you feel like your time is really supporting your vision, your long-term vision and your short-term vision. So you have to do what works for you. You make the rules. And also to remember, there are different seasons. A friend of mine recently was sharing with me how it's frustrating to try to manage her time while her child is so young. There are different seasons in our lives and different things that we need to prioritize with our time during those different times. So my personal preference is this, and I would encourage you to try this. My personal preference is to create your time boundaries when you're taking into consideration your busiest season. Because that way you have that really solid boundary and you give yourself wiggle room if you do end up having more time on your hands. So, for example, I sat down and created Emily's new hard and fast time boundaries with the vision of being able to do whatever I wanted 2 days a week during the summer. I don't care if that's a weekend. I don't care if it's 2 days during the week, but I do know that I do not want to spend my entire summer working. So I'm going to put my strict boundaries into place that involve like being busy in my business and also being able to enjoy summer. So that's like the busiest possible time I can think of. I mean, apart from like the holidays, but same cadence basically. So sit down and do your time boundaries when you're taking into consideration your busiest times, because that's when you're going to be able to say, oh, these are really working for me. And when it's a little slower, you do have a little bit more wiggle room. It's also okay with boundaries to, they're again subjective. So some people might get access to different boundaries than others. That is something only you can decide. I wish we had time to do a whole entire podcast episode on like the different types of boundaries, because there's actually like 6 or 7 different types of boundaries you can establish, and they're all pretty interesting. But we don't have time for that today. Maybe in the future. I'll leave you with that. I'll give you a couple of resources in the show notes, including that Substack article that I wrote on my time experiment. I also, back in 2020, when time really was something, I don't know what it was, but it was really something, I wrote an article for Brains magazine. So I'll include a link to that. And then I have a few other resources for you that I've really enjoyed when it comes to time and time boundaries and creating them. And they're not your classic like time management and, that kind of thing. They're just really nice, healthy resources. One of which is my friend Lisa Zawrotny's Positively Productive podcast. She's just so good about taking like a very compassionate approach to productivity and not, she really humanizes productivity and time management. And I absolutely love it. Like she takes into consideration that we all actually are human beings. So I'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes as well. Next week, like I said, we're going to get into some of the topics around people pleasing, but I'm no people pleasing. I mean, I'm a people pleasing expert, let me tell you that, but I don't know, I'm not going to take like a therapeutic approach or anything. We're going to just talk about how it might be making an appearance in your marketing and in your content and what you can actually do about that. So where you might want to check yourself before you wreck yourself and what you can actually do to kind of overcome some of those tendencies in your marketing and in your content. So I will chat with you then. And don't forget to text or leave a voicemail if you feel so inclined. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Content with Character. If you loved the episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, and share it with someone else you know it could help. For more content and visibility tips, visit my blog at emilyaborn.com and be sure to connect with me on Instagram at emilyaborn. I'd love to hear how this inspired you to take action.